Vietnam 2018 Part 6 Gioc Waterfalls National Park, Ba Be. Soon after leaving the village of Phia Thap, we made a short break to visit some blacksmiths. There, beside the road, a few people have their blacksmith workshops, and they make tools that they are famous for. I thought of buying a good kitchen knife, but first I didn't feel like carrying a piece of iron in my backpack for the next 3 weeks or so, and second, although it would certainly go into the checked baggage, I was worried because of the airport security. Later I regretted not buying a nice small cleaver, for they really seemed great, but what can I do? Maybe some other time. What was particularly interesting was a workshop in which a husband and a wife worked together, while she also had a small child tied to her back, and as her body moved to and fro while hitting with her hammer, so did the child, without a single sound of complaint. That woman was particularly spirited, since she made jokes at her own expense, saying that she eats a lot, 5 bowls of rice, as she needs a lot of strength to help her husband. Then we first went to Nguam Ngao, which means Tiger's Cave. It's a 2-kilometer long cave that was discovered at the beginning of the 20th century, but was opened for visitors in 1996. We all walked nicely there, and it was particularly interesting that in a few places I could see some plants growing there thanks to the light installed in the cave. After our visit to the cave, we moved to the main destination, and that was the Ban Gioc waterfalls, situated on the very border between Vietnam and China. These are the largest waterfalls in Vietnam, not by their height, they are merely around 30 meters high, but by the scope they cover, which is around 300 meters. According to some criteria, they seem to be the 5th largest waterfalls in the world. They don't appear like that, but they were certainly spectacular. First, we walked along the shore of the river looking at the waterfalls, as well as China, that is just across the river, because both the waterfalls and the river separate these 2 countries, and both countries have vessels on which tourists can approach the waterfalls. Then we embarked on a raft that took us very close to the waterfalls as well as China. Each detail and point of view was great, and we stayed there for a while. By the way, the local residents use bamboo rafts in order to go from one shore to the other, that is, from one country to the other. After a circle we made by the raft on the main course of the river, we walked a little to the side branches, and the images were impressive everywhere. By the way, the waterfalls are created by the Khe Song River. Then we went to a restaurant in the place called Quang Nguyen, and there I was paid a great compliment to my mind by one of the waitresses commenting aloud that I looked like a Vietnamese, and even pointed out the fact as she saw it to one other guest. Actually, I asked Luan to check this, since I did not understand anything apart from the word Viet and pointing at me, but I presumed what it was about and just wanted to verify it. The food was great at this place, and I really had a very nice meal. If you go to Vietnam and this general area, I don't know if one particular dish is prepared elsewhere, make sure you order la mac mat quon tit. In other words, some leaves wrapped in pieces of pork and then deep fried. Exceptionally tasty, leaves including. Somewhere along the way, I realized that I actually very much liked the cap I had seen the grandson of our host in the village of Phia Thap wearing, and I wanted to buy one as a souvenir from this region. We stopped at a couple of places to see if I could buy something like this, but as it turned out, such caps cannot be bought in shops, but rather members of the Nung people make them by hand for their own needs. I felt sorry that I could not find it, but then it occurred to Luan to ask the blacksmiths, since we were passing by their workshops anyway. So we stopped at the one who had worked with his wife earlier that day, and he said he might have a cap like that at home, and his home was just 1 kilometer away. So he sat on his motorbike, left his workshop and all inside of it to us, and went to fetch the cap. He eventually returned with two, one for a boy and another for a girl, and I bought both of them. At first glance, the patterns on the cap seemed printed, but then the blacksmith told Luan that each cap takes several days to be made. Then I looked at them more closely, and I saw it was a very fine work, and what I thought was a printed pattern was actually the most delicate embroidery I had ever seen. I was truly happy. So we continued driving to the Ba Be National Park. This took a while, but it was not boring, since we were passing through some beautiful mountainous landscapes. We reached the Ba Be National Park when it was already dark. The plan for the night was for us to sleep again in a homestay that was within the park and on the lake shore. But in order to get there, the minibus first took us to a shore where, lit by flashlights, we transferred onto a boat and then headed across the lake surrounded by darkness. Here and there, in the distance, we saw some lights of the houses that were located around the lake, but everything else was pitch black. Then the guy who was at the bow turned on the flashlight in order for the boat to proceed safely, and I could see we were entering a narrow canal. The images and the dim colors of the lit sections were truly magical. Still, to the left and right it was just dark. And then we saw some lights ahead of us and realized that the canal led to the house in which we would spend the night. Although this is also considered to be a homestay, the place belongs to an agency specialized for the Ba Be National Park, so everything seemed a little better and more polished in comparison to the previous experiences. Everybody was absolutely kind, but I did miss the smiles and the cordiality of our hosts from the Nung people, not to mention their rice brandy. The next morning, after breakfast, with no rush, we embarked on the boat with all of our things, and first made a circle around one section of the lake, and then took our luggage to the shore and transferred it into the minibus, after which we continued with our boat ride. By the way, Ba means 3 lakes, and these are in fact 3 connected lakes. They are not big, the second one being actually a relatively narrow canal bringing together the first and the third lakes, but the nature around us was truly beautiful. We sailed across all 3 lakes and then came to a place where water runs out of the lakes and soon joins the Song Nang River. There the boat parked and we went out in order to walk parallel to the river next to some farms while the boat went on to wait for us a little farther upstream. During this walk we often came across sows with tiny piglets, and as this was a rather small breed, the piglets were still young and suckling. Their chase after their mother, who was looking for some food for herself, was absolutely adorable. The fields we passed by were now mostly dried soil, but some were being ploughed by farmers, who were also starting to sow rice in some plots in order to get seedlings for later on, while green vegetables grew in some other plots. We also came across a dense net on which some fish were left out to dry. Soon we embarked on the boat again and moved on. By the way, the Ba National Park is in the UNESCO's tentative World Natural Heritage List, not only because of the nature, mountains, numerous caves and waterfalls, but primarily because of the large number of forests, including primary ones. It means those that grow with no human interference, as well as because of the diverse flora and fauna with a large number of rare species. And all of that over a limestone base which appears to be omnipresent in most of Vietnam. While continuing with the tranquil boat ride along the river, surrounded by greenery and limestone formations rising from the adjacent terrain, all of a sudden a cave started to appear in front of us. Or rather, this was a huge tunnel in one of those limestone formations through which the Song Nang River passes. The sight was spectacular. The boat took us to a staircase leading into the cave. The Zhongpuang cave is well known for the large number of bats that gather inside of it, and since we were the only visitors at that point and we kept silent, all the time we could hear the sounds of numerous bats, although they could not be seen since they stay in dark and narrow crevices in the cave's ceiling. We walked to the end of the not too long path, admiring the fantastic cave formations, and then we returned back to the boat the same way. In the meantime, some other tourists also came. We sailed for a little bit more, then transferred onto our minibus, soon made a break for lunch, and it was already the time to head back to Hanoi. Still, our tour was not over yet, and along the way we stopped at a small tea plantation, since we were going through the areas where we could see numerous tea bushes. I have already mentioned that by the rule green tea is the tea of choice in Vietnam. Still, the owner of this tea plantation had already sold all of his stocks, so we stopped at some other place where Sneža could buy some green tea to take back as a gift. In that rest area, however, we also came across a mini bakery, and it all smelled wonderfully of the freshly baked pastry, so we could not help ourselves and bought a small bun. This was by far the tastiest pastry of the brioche type I had ever tried in my life. The softness, the lightness, and the fantastic flavor of the pastry forced us to buy another piece, and just as we were getting ready to enter the minibus, a freshest round of buns came, and we felt compelled to go back and buy another one. They were all perfect. Having returned to Hanoi, we sauntered around the center for a while, but we also went to try one of the versions of coffee that may often be found in Vietnamese cafes. Namely, instead of some whipped cream, a densely beaten egg yolk with condensed milk and sugar is put on top of coffee. We found it interesting, but not more than that.